You gonna shoot me with that antique, Grandpa? The alien raider sneered as he grabbed the drink from the counter and poured it over Jax's head. The entire saloon went dead silent. In that split second, even the music player glitched into a buzz. Jax didn't flinch. He just set the glass down, turned, and reached for the rifle hanging on the wall behind him. And suddenly, no one was laughing anymore. Jax had been pouring drinks in that dusty corner of Trianfor for nearly 10 years. The Broken Moon Saloon was barely more than a metal shack with some charm and a squeaky fan, wedged between a repair depot and a fuel station that smelled like burned coolant. Most nights were slow. Some nights saw a couple of drunks sharing smuggler gossip, maybe the occasional bounty hunter spinning stories over sour mash. But today was different. The heat was thicker. The air had a tension to it, like the universe had taken one long breath and was waiting to see who snapped first. The trouble started the second the three raiders walked in, boots heavy and egos heavier. They were Ragthor Syndicate muscle, easily identified by their scarred armor, and those stupid bone trophies swinging off their belts. The lead one, a spiky, muscle-clad brute with eyes like molten tar, swaggered up to the bar like he owned it. Jax didn't say a word. He never did when new problems came through the door. Instead, he kept wiping the same glass, eyes half-lidded, like the world just wasn't interesting anymore. The raiders didn't like being ignored. The big one slapped a stool out of the way and leaned over the counter, close enough for Jax to smell the reek of burnt spiceweed on his breath. He tapped the rifle mounted behind Jax with a sharp, mocking finger. "That for decoration, barkeep?" He grinned. "Or just there to scare flies?" His two buddies snorted laughter behind him, slapping the counter. One even knocked over a tray of glasses, which shattered across the floor. No one in the saloon moved. A few patrons subtly slipped out the back door. Others froze with their drinks halfway to their lips, watching. The locals knew better than to get involved when the Ragthor came knocking. They were syndicate enforcers, the kind that burned a village for sport and laughed about it afterward. Jax kept wiping the glass. One long, lazy circle at a time. Then the brute picked up a shot glass of golden liquor and threw it straight at Jax's chest. It hit, cracked, and dripped down his shirt like melted gold. The brute leaned back and grinned wide, teeth like yellow daggers. And that was when he made his mistake. "You gonna shoot me with that antique, Grandpa?" he said. That's when Jax moved. His hand didn't even seem to reach, it arrived at the rifle like it had been waiting there for years. In a motion so fast it looked unnatural, he ripped it from the wall. The rifle hummed as it powered up, a strange, low frequency that made the air pulse. It wasn't a relic. It wasn't even legal in this sector. It was a relic from a time before peace treaties, before protocol, before the galaxy grew soft. The brute barely had time to process the shift in atmosphere before Jax squeezed the trigger. A blue-white pulse round slammed into the raider's chest and launched him across the saloon. He hit the far wall so hard the metal buckled, then dropped like a sack of dead meat. Silence followed. Long, heavy. Even the fan above seemed to stop. The two remaining raiders froze. Their eyes flicked to each other, then to Jax, whose face hadn't changed. Calm. Cold. His stance was firm, shoulders square, like someone who had trained for this moment every day of his life. The rifle's barrel smoked gently, its glow fading but ready to fire again. The smell of ionized air filled the room. "Out," Jax said. Just one word. Quiet. Dangerous. The smaller raider stumbled over a barstool trying to get out. The other backed toward the door with his weapon halfway drawn, until Jax took a half step forward and raised the rifle again. The weapon pulsed in his hand like it was eager to kill something else. They ran. The saloon didn't breathe until the door slammed shut behind them. A long exhale of relief swept the room like a draft. Jax gently set the rifle down on the counter. He picked up a fresh rag and began cleaning the same glass. One of the regulars, an old miner with a face like cracked leather, raised his drink and muttered, "Well, that escalated." Laughter rippled around the room, nervous, relieved, but sharp at the edges. The kind of laugh people use when they realize they're still alive. A young mechanic near the corner whispered to her friend. That wasn't just a bartender. Jax kept cleaning. But in the back of the saloon, hidden behind the bar's old processor unit, a small transmitter blinked to life. It had been triggered by the rifle's pulse signature, one that hadn't been detected in over a decade. Far away, on a battered warship drifting beyond the asteroid belt, a bounty hunter's comms panel lit up with a red alert. Target found, Ghost 17. Back in the saloon, Jax finally looked up. For a second, just one heartbeat, his gaze didn't belong to a bartender. It belonged to a soldier. A killer. A ghost from wars most people weren't old enough to remember. And just like that, the saloon wasn't just a saloon anymore. It was ground zero. The first thing Jax did after the raiders fled was check the energy core in the rifle. Still stable. 2 more shots left in the primary cell, and maybe 4 in the auxiliary if he pushed it. He hadn't touched the weapon in years, but it responded to him like an old dog remembering its master. The feel of the grip, the faint weight behind each movement, it was all muscle memory, buried under 10 years of pretending to be something he wasn't. The bar patrons were still murmuring when he slid the rifle back beneath the counter, out of sight but not out of mind. Eyes followed him, conversations hushed, but no one dared ask the obvious question. Not yet. Outside, the twin suns were setting, casting a long orange glow across the desert that shimmered like heat mirages on water. Tryon 4 always looked peaceful from a distance. That was the trick of it. It had drawn Jackson all those years ago because it looked forgotten, like no one would come looking for ghosts out here. But ghosts had a way of resurfacing, and he could feel the weight of old debts pressing against his ribs again. The kind of pressure that always came before someone tried to kill you. He didn't speak as he cleaned up the broken glass and wiped the counter where the brute had slammed his drink. The place still smelled faintly of plasma and burnt fabric, but it didn't bother him. What did bother him was the blinking red light on the back of the liquor shelf. It was small, barely visible unless you knew where to look, and for 10 years, it had been nothing more than a dead sensor. Now it pulsed. Steady. Rhythmic. A heartbeat. Someone was listening. Jax walked over and flipped a concealed panel behind the shelf. Inside was a buried comms relay, one that hadn't broadcast since he'd faked his death on Var N6. It was supposed to stay dark. Triggering it meant someone, somewhere, had been tracking his weapon's energy signature. That wasn't possible unless they had access to old Ghost Company archives. Those files were sealed, scrubbed, erased like they never existed. Which meant someone had cracked them. Or worse, someone from the inside had sold him out. He locked the relay, but he knew it was too late. If the signal had gone out, it would draw attention. Not just bounty hunters. Not just syndicate scum. Ghost Company had made enemies in every corner of the galaxy, and not all of them were above vengeance. Some wanted closure. Some wanted payback. Others wanted the tech he carried. And some, like the Ragthor Syndicate, wanted all three. Back in the saloon, the mood had shifted from stunned silence to quiet awe. A few brave souls approached the bar again, ordered drinks with uncertain glances, like they were waiting for the next explosion. One man slid a credit chit across the counter, hands trembling. "You served in the drop zones, didn't you?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I seen a shot like that once. On Fexus Prime. Ghost Ops dropped in and cleaned out a whole compound before dawn. They moved like shadows." Jax didn't respond. He poured the man's drink, pushed it gently across the bar, and returned to his rag. Another voice, this time from the far end of the room. "That guy you shot, he had a 10,000 credit bounty. Might go higher now that he's dead." "I didn't shoot him for credits," Jax said without looking up. One of the older patrons chuckled dryly. "Then you did it for pride?" "No," Jax said, setting the glass down. "I did it because he touched the rifle." That shut them up. He could feel their curiosity growing, but it wasn't time yet. If he fed it too soon, they'd panic. And panic would bring more eyes. He needed the saloon to stay quiet. Not just because he liked the place, but because it was the last space he controlled. The only piece of the galaxy that still felt like it belonged to him. But it wouldn't stay that way for long. Later that night, just as the second moon began to rise over the salt dunes, a low whine echoed across the flats. Not loud. Not urgent. But Jax knew the sound like a scar. Hover bikes. 2, maybe 3. Moving fast. No running lights. No signal beacons. Syndicate. They were coming back to clean up what their idiot scout squad had started. He stepped outside and stood under the rusted awning. The desert wind tugged at his shirt. Sand kicked up in small swirls. He watched the horizon as 3 glowing streaks moved like ghosts across the flats, weaving between rock spires and broken shipping crates from decades-old freighter wrecks. They were faster than before. Smarter. These weren't punks looking for drinks and a bar fight. These were hunters. Jax turned and walked back inside. The patrons were pretending not to notice, but they had the look, shoulders tense, drinks untouched. He cleared his throat once and spoke louder than usual. Anyone who wants to leave, do it now. Through the back. No questions. A few stood. A couple hesitated. The regulars didn't move. Old Ben, the leather-faced miner, shook his head. You saved this place once already. Ain't right to run now. Jax almost smiled. Almost. He reached under the bar and pulled out a small case. Inside were 3 stun mines, a perimeter drone, and an encrypted field jammer. The gear was old, dusty, but reliable. Ghost Company gear didn't fail. It outlasted everyone. He handed the mines to one of the younger guys, a mechanic with shaky hands but good instincts. Plant these at the east side fence. Set proximity to 3 meters. Then get low. The kid didn't argue. Jax respected that. He placed the drone at the rooftop hatch and set it to auto-target mode, sweeping for fast movers. Last thing he did was flip open the field jammer, setting it to short burst, enough to fry any incoming comms or tracking beacons without alerting orbital eyes. As the hoverbikes closed in, he walked behind the counter, reached under the floorboard, and lifted out the heavy metallic crate bolted to the foundation. His fingers danced over the biometric lock. A soft hiss, then the case opened. Inside was not just a rifle, but a relic of his former life. The rifle was one thing. But this was a custom-issue Ghost tactical kit. Shoulder-mounted rail darts. Smoke grenades coated to heat-seek breath patterns. A compact plasma sidearm with 0 recoil. Not a bartender's tools. A Ghost's. The first blast rocked the side of the saloon. Jax didn't flinch. He stood slowly, rifle in hand again, this time loaded with a fresh cell. He glanced toward the entrance as the saloon's front doors shuddered under a second impact. You still alive? Old Ben muttered from behind a flip table. For now, Jax said. And then the front doors burst inward. The front doors blasted open with a burst of blinding light and swirling dust, and through the haze came the unmistakable silhouettes of armored syndicate mercs. These weren't the same street punks who had swaggered in earlier. These were tactical units, wearing reinforced composite armor with neural-linked helmets, breathing in unison through rebreathers that hissed like predators ready to strike. Jax didn't wait. The second the first boot hit the saloon floor, he fired. A blue-white bolt punched through the first merc's chest and lit up the room like a lightning strike. The body dropped mid-step, armor still sizzling. The others scattered, shouting orders in some dialect Jax hadn't heard since the border wars. He understood enough. They weren't here to intimidate. They were here to kill. Jax moved fast, sliding across the counter and taking cover behind a pillar near the center of the room. A barrage of plasma bolts followed, tearing into the bar and setting bottles and wiring ablaze. Glass exploded overhead. The drone on the roof kicked into life, emitting a warning buzz before unleashing twin pulses that scorched 2 mercs trying to flank the east window. Jax didn't need to look. He could hear the screams, the crunch of armor giving way to energy, and the heavy thuds of bodies hitting dirt. Inside, old Ben was cursing as he fumbled with a rusted sidearm he hadn't fired since his mining days. The young mechanic, face pale but steady, dragged a wounded patron behind an overturned table. The bar was now a war zone. And for the first time in 10 years, Jax felt something spark in his chest. Not adrenaline. Not anger. Purpose. The saloon's structural integrity wasn't built to withstand a prolonged firefight. Every bolt and weld groaned with each new explosion. Jax needed to end it fast. He flipped a smoke grenade from his tack kit and rolled it low across the floor. It hissed, then erupted in a cloud of reactive fog, dense, thermal-shifting smoke that made targeting systems glitch and human eyes water. He pushed through it like a shark through silt, rifle tucked tight, breath slow and measured. He reached the far end of the saloon, crouched behind a shattered booth, and waited for the telltale beep of a Merc's motion scanner. It came. Right on time. Jax popped up and fired point blank. The Merc dropped instantly, visor cracked, his weapon clattering beside him. Another one came from the left, swinging a pulse baton. Jax blocked the strike with his rifle, pivoted, and drove his elbow into the man's throat. The Merc stumbled, wheezing, just long enough for Jax to slam him into a wall and end it with a clean shot to the chest. Outside, the drones signaled a new inbound. Not from the sky this time, ground vehicles. A low rumble vibrated through the earth, the sound of grav lift haulers approaching. The Ragther were bringing reinforcements. This was no longer a cleanup squad. This was an assault team. Jax ran to the bar's backroom and threw open the old food freezer. Behind a hidden compartment, he yanked out a worn-out comms pack and jammed in a neural chip from his rifle. The holographic interface flickered to life, showing a local radar sweep. Red dots clustered at the perimeter. More were spreading toward the main road. But one signal blinked yellow, fast-moving and coming from the north ridge. Unknown identifier. He squinted at the signal. Then he smirked. Only one person flew in low and reckless like that. Tala. She arrived like a storm, low-flying shuttle whipping dust into spirals, side hatch already open, plasma cannon primed. She wasn't aiming at the saloon. She was aiming at the vehicles gathering just beyond the outer dune line. The cannon barked, and fire rained down. The lead hauler exploded, flipping midair before crashing into its escorts. The syndicate squads broke rank in the chaos. Jax kicked open the saloon's back door just as Tala landed. She stepped out of the shuttle in full battle gear, braids tucked tight, visor down, armor marked with an old insignia he hadn't seen in years. Ghost Company. She hadn't forgotten either. She surveyed the scene, looked at Jax's rifle, and tilted her head. "They said you were dead," she said coolly. "They say a lot of things," Jax replied. She holstered her sidearm and walked past him, stepping into the still-smoking saloon. Her eyes scanned the chaos, the injured, the walls cratered with plasma marks, the melted bar counter. "Still can't keep a low profile, huh?" she muttered. "Wasn't planning on a reunion," Jax said. She stopped at the body of the Merc he'd shot through the chest and crouched, checking the insignia. "Ragther elites," she said. "They don't send these guys unless you've really pissed someone off. I just shot one of their lieutenants." Tala raised an eyebrow. "You know how many people would pay to do that? Apparently enough to get me hunted." She stood again, more serious now. "This isn't just a syndicate job anymore. They're bouncing your image across the entire central ring. Half the bounty boards just lit up with your face. They're offering credits, tech, even favors from council operatives. So the usual mess. Worse. Someone tagged your rifle's pulse signature. That shouldn't even be possible." "I know," Jax said, jaw tightening. "Which means someone inside Ghost leaked it." Tala didn't argue. She just nodded, her expression hard. "Then we don't have time to sit and drink." "Didn't plan to," he said, stepping past her. Together they returned to the front, surveying the wreckage. The saloon's walls were barely holding. The drone had been hit, and was now crackling uselessly. Fires burned in small patches across the room. Patrons were beginning to stand dazed, bruised, but alive. Jax looked at them. They looked back. No one said a word. Then the young mechanic stepped forward and offered Jax his tool belt. "If you're staying, I'm staying." Old Ben grunted in agreement. Hell, I got nothing better to do. Plus you owe me 2 drinks. Jack shook his head. This isn't going to be a last stand. It's going to be a message. Tala raised an eyebrow. To who? To anyone watching, he said. They think I've been hiding. They think I'm alone. Time to show them what happens when a ghost stops running. And with that, Jax walked out onto the dusty main road, rifle in hand, watching the desert horizon for whatever came next. The next morning broke over Tryon 4 with a blood-orange sky and silence that felt heavier than any gunfire. The saloon was still standing, though barely. The front wall was scorched and pockmarked, the windows blackened with soot, and the sign that once read, "Broken Moon Saloon," now hung by a single bolt, swaying like a warning in the breeze. Jack sat at a table outside, the rifle across his lap, sipping recycled water from a dented cup like it was morning coffee. Tala stood nearby, staring at the distant hills with her visor up, eyes narrowed. The air was still, but both of them knew that wouldn't last. They hadn't slept. There was no point. After the firefight, after the explosion of the grav haulers and the drone's final scream, they'd spent the rest of the night fortifying the building and patching up wounds. The young mechanic, whose name turned out to be Keys, had rigged half the saloon's lights to run on backup cells from a mining drone, and old Ben had proved surprisingly adept at laying down trip mines with disturbing enthusiasm. Most of the patrons had cleared out in the early morning hours, wanting no part of what came next. Jax didn't blame them. What was coming wasn't a brawl. It was a warhead aimed at him disguised as a syndicate. The comms relay blinked again inside the saloon, a red pulse that kept perfect time like a metronome of doom. Jax had tried to jam it, reroute it, even fry it, but the tech was smarter than it should have been. Someone had tied it directly into orbital satellites, masking it behind diplomatic frequencies no one was supposed to access. Not unless they had government clearance. Which meant this wasn't just about the Ragther Syndicate anymore. Someone with authority wanted Jax flushed into the open. Tala joined him at the table, still in armor, her expression unreadable. He could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. She was calculating options, escape routes, probabilities. It was what she always did. Even before the fall of Ghost Company, she was the one who ran simulations in her head while the rest of them prepped charges or cracked enemy walls. I ran the list, she said, not bothering with preamble. 3 people had clearance to access the Ghost Core archives after shutdown. 1 died in a cruiser explosion. 1 disappeared into Varric space 3 years ago. That leaves 1. Jax didn't have to ask. He already knew. Commander Lex Soren. Once their unit's handler. Now a ghost in his own right. The man had vanished after the burn operation on New Osea, taking half the division's Black Project data with him. He'd always played both sides, but everyone thought he was dead. Jax had hoped he was. Tala continued. If Soren's alive, and if he sold the rifle's signature data, then the Syndicate isn't just after you. They're after the blueprint embedded in the weapon. It was supposed to be wiped. Jax muttered. It wasn't, she said. I checked the rifle's resonance patterns last night. There's a dormant packet sitting in its core. Some kind of encrypted Aegis protocol. Jax exhaled slowly. The Aegis project. That was no rumor. It was the last card Ghost Company ever tried to play. A weapon interface system capable of bypassing AI security across every known galactic grid. Jax had carried the rifle for its firepower. He hadn't realized he was also carrying the key to one of the most dangerous systems ever conceived. You think Soren sold it to the Ragther? He asked. Tala shook her head. No. He's smarter than that. He's letting them flush you out. Once you use it, once it activates, they track the signature. And then he comes in to clean up and collect the core. So we're bait. We're the last piece he needs. Jack stood up, slinging the rifle over his shoulder, and walked back inside the saloon. The interior smelled like plasma residue and desperation. Keys was snoring under a table, one boot still on, a soldering torch in his lap. Old Ben sat at the counter eating jerky like nothing had happened. We've got a few hours before they push again, Jax said. Less if they're coming from orbit. Ben grunted. Then we make it count. Jax walked to the far corner and pried open the floor hatch again. This time, he dug deeper. Beneath the tactical gear was another compartment, one he hadn't touched in a decade. He pulled out a box about the size of a lunch tin. Black, seamless, with a biometric lock only his DNA could open. He placed his thumb on the pad, and the lid hissed open. Inside was the kill code. The Aegis protocol chip. It wasn't labeled, of course. Nothing in Ghost Company was. But the red-gold glint of the etched microcode was unmistakable. It was the reason his team had died. The reason he'd disappeared. The reason the bar had been a trap all along. Tala watched from the doorway. You're not going to destroy it. No, Jax said. I'm going to use it. You use that chip, the system won't just tag you. It'll tag this entire quadrant. I know. And if you fail to kill the uplink fast enough, then the galaxy burns, he said flatly. She didn't argue. She just stepped inside, removed her helmet, and dropped it on the bar. Then we do it right. By midday, the saloon was a fortress. Every angle calculated. Every point of entry lined with more firepower than a rebel cruiser. Jax and Tala coordinated silently, slipping into their old rhythm without missing a beat. The townsfolk who remained helped without question. Keys ran lines to the main fusion tap, jury-rigging turrets from salvage drones. Ben reinforced the doors with durasteel plating from the junkyard. They weren't soldiers, but they had something better than training. They had a reason. As the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched across the desert, Jax stood on the rooftop with Tala, staring toward the far horizon. A shape moved there. Not a speeder. Not a drone. Something bigger. Broader. He pulled his scope and focused. It was a Syndicate command crawler. 6-legged, shielded, heavy cannon equipped. It hadn't been seen on Tryon 4 in years. It meant one thing. Soren was here. Jax lowered the scope. He's betting I won't use the Aegis. Tala crossed her arms. He's betting wrong. Down below, the saloon lights flickered on. The transmitter blinked again, this time brighter. Faster. Closer. The war wasn't coming. It had already begun. The crawler moved like a mechanical beast, its 6 legs slamming into the cracked salt ground with seismic weight, each step rippling through the bones of the town. It cast a long shadow across the dying light of Tryon 4, dwarfing the landscape, its armored body bristling with turret pods and antennae. The Ragthor emblem painted along its hull was fresh. This wasn't a recycled unit. This was frontline tech. High command deployment. It confirmed what Jax and Tala already knew. This wasn't a cleanup anymore. It was a sanctioned extraction. Soren was inside, hiding behind walls of hired death, waiting for the rifle to fire again so he could trace the signal and finish the job himself. Jax stood at the front of the saloon, rifle gripped tight, boots planted where the dirt turned to packed stone. Around him, the last handful of locals remained behind their cover, makeshift armor strapped over work clothes, weapons charged and pointed at the hills. None of them asked why they stayed. They didn't need to. He'd saved them once, and now they stood not behind a legend, but beside him. That mattered. Tala moved through the ranks without a word, checking equipment, adjusting scopes, tightening straps. She paused only once, beside Keys, the mechanic now clad in a patchwork vest wired with shock plates. She gave him a short nod. The kid returned it, mouth tight, too nervous to speak. He'd never seen a real battlefield. He was about to learn what it meant to stand your ground. The crawler stopped just outside firing range. Too smart to come closer. Its ramp hissed, lowered, and out walked the last person Jax ever wanted to see again. Lex Soren looked older, but no less dangerous. He was clean, polished, hair short and slicked back, his black uniform pressed like a military relic. No insignia. No rank. Just the swagger of a man who never had to pay for anything he broke. He walked with his hands behind his back, surrounded by 2 elite guards in chrome armor and visor helms that filtered the desert light into a muted shimmer. Soren stopped just past the last sand ridge and called out. Jax! Ghost 17! You always did have a flair for theatrics. Jax didn't reply. Soren continued. You could have run. Again. But here you are, standing on the bones of some backwater town with a pulse rifle that shouldn't exist. You don't have to die here. Tala stepped forward, voice sharp. You're not here to offer mercy. You're here to clean up your mess. Soren smiled without warmth. Tala. Still hiding behind dead orders? The program ended a long time ago. You should have cashed in. Jax raised the rifle and aimed it straight at Soren. You still talk too much. That smile faded. The first shot didn't come from Jax. It came from the crawler's upper turret, a warning burst that exploded in a thundercrack across the town's edge. The blast kicked up dirt and flame, sending shrapnel into the sky. The townsfolk ducked, returned fire. Chaos erupted. Bolts screamed between buildings. Dust clouds choked the horizon. Jax didn't wait. He moved with purpose, running through the barrage toward the side alley where he and Tala had stashed the uplink beacon. He slapped the Aegis chip into the console, eyes narrowing as the interface flared to life. Blue light streamed from the screen. Lines of code unfurled, locked into the rifle's core. The weapon pulsed in his hands, its systems awakening fully for the first time in over a decade. It wasn't just a gun now. It was a key to a system that could rewrite any battlefield's rules. Tala covered him from above, her shots surgical and fast. Two of Soren's elites fell trying to flank, their visors cracked, bodies crumpling. Keys, to everyone's surprise, held his own, firing short bursts with shaking hands but perfect aim, taking down drones before they reached the saloon wall. Old Ben took a hit to the shoulder and still managed to chuck a stun charge over a barrier, laughing through the pain. Jax locked the Aegis protocol into place, aimed the rifle upward, and squeezed the trigger. The beam it fired wasn't a bullet. It was a signal. A burst of pure data encoded with killcode frequencies, designed to shatter command lines and scramble AI combat grids. For a second, the air went silent. Then everything changed. The crawler's turrets froze. Drones dropped out of the sky mid-flight. Half of the mercenaries' weapons powered down, their HUDs blinking out as the system collapse spread like a virus. Confusion tore through Soren's ranks. And that's when Jax struck. He charged toward the crawler with Tala at his side, covering his flank. The final approach felt like moving through a dying storm, machines breaking down, sparks flying, systems screaming. The two remaining guards tried to intercept. Jax dropped one with a burst to the chest, then ducked under a blade swing from the second and drove the butt of his rifle into the man's throat. Tala finished it with a clean headshot. They reached the ramp. Soren was standing there, pistol drawn, teeth bared in frustration. You don't understand what you're destroying, he snapped. Jax didn't stop walking. You used us. You betrayed every name on that wall. You don't get to call this your plan. Soren fired. The round hit Jax in the side, grazing his ribs. He stumbled, then raised the rifle again. This time, he didn't aim for a leg. The pulse round hit Soren in the chest and sent him crashing into the crawler's bulkhead. The pistol clattered to the ground. He gasped once, mouth twisting in disbelief, and then went still. Tala walked up beside Jax, breathing hard. You okay? I will be, he muttered, clutching his side. They climbed inside the crawler. The ship's systems were rebooting in emergency mode. The Aegis protocol had wiped most of its functions, but not the recorder. Jax pulled the command chip, downloaded Soren's files, and inserted a blank cube from his belt. Everything would be documented, every deal, every syndicate contract, every trace of betrayal. Enough to burn the whole operation down. Back at the saloon, the battle was over. The remaining syndicate mercs had fled into the desert, their systems dead, their orders lost with Soren. Fires crackled low across the town, but no more shots were fired. Keys limped past a broken fence, a smudge of blood across his cheek. Ben grunted as he tied a crude sling for his arm. The townsfolk emerged from cover one by one, blinking in disbelief. Jax and Tala returned by dusk, walking into the saloon like nothing had happened. The broken moon was still standing. Barely. Tala tossed her helmet on the counter and leaned against the wall. What now? Jax looked around the room, at the broken glass, the cracked walls, the faces that had stood with him. I rebuild, he said. Maybe not the saloon, but something. You keeping the rifle? He looked at it. Felt the weight of it in his hands. Then nodded. Someone's got to watch the door. And with that, he sat down at the bar, lifted a cracked glass, and poured 2 drinks. One for him. One for the ghosts.